you say that. So now we have to move on. Now we have to talk about socialism, and you can talk about the virtues of socialism.
Right, of course,
So you had a discussion you did on YouTube called the how socialism suppresses society, and in it, you made some remarks saying that it's hostility to property. And nonetheless, all variations of socialism have in common an impulse toward coercing society toward material equality and communal property ownership. Although these factors are economic, they can't be realized without the exertion of political force. So can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I can just back up a moment and indicate that when I was about maybe 20 years old, I regarded myself as a socialist. That was something that I had was briefly captivated by, because it seemed to be, if you look at social democratic parties in Germany and Scandinavian countries and so forth, it seemed as though people were fairly comfortable there. There wasn't a lot of poverty and the like, and it seemed to be that was the way to go. I didn't stay in that camp for very long, as it turned out, because I was at that point I was looking a little bit more deeply than just a kind of economic system, if you will, because socialism is more than just an economic system. In the same way you can say that liberalism is more than a political system. You have to dig down into the heart. There's much going on that deep spiritual level within the ideologies and the followers of these ideologies. So socialism, I do not believe that it's wrong to champion communal ownership of property. I visited a group not too far from Cambridge called the Brethren of Early Christianity that is characterized by a wide range of common ownership. It's a kind of communal, it's a kind of a Hutterite-inspired community in Southern Ontario. And very impressed with what they were doing there, but a lot of the people are related to each other. There are families, whole families that are part of that. Once you start getting into a larger community, the area of life that can be communally centered is going to shrink necessarily. So in a country like the Soviet Union, where they attempted to bring about communal ownership of property on a vast scale, it did not work because people did not know each other. The levels of trust outside of family networks were very weak, at least in many parts of the Russian Empire. So when there was an attempt to try to implement socialism, it ended up foundering, and after 70 years, it pretty much ran out of steam, and it couldn't continue to function in that same way. Now, what socialists neglect to recognize is that we already have communal ownership of property in our societies. But we have a variety of communities that can be said to own property. So the family home, my wife and daughter and I are owners of our home. It belongs to us. It's the subject of communal ownership. It doesn't just belong to me. I'm not an ancient Roman patriarch who's wielding that owns everybody and everything that's in. No, there's a family, and the family can be said to own this home. The same if you could talk about a university, maybe Tyndale University in Toronto. They own property. It's a corporate kind of ownership of property. If you go to the Ford plant, just where the 403 branches off from the Queen Elizabeth Way in is that Oakville, I think it is. That property is owned by the Ford Motor Company. So there are a variety of communities that own property. What socialists want to try to do is to try to eliminate all those and consolidate those into one single subject of ownership, which they label the community with a capital C. And so, when I came to recognize that in my younger years, I recognized, oh, wait a minute, socialists are not trying to bring about to replace individual ownership with communal ownership. But basically, what we already have is a kind of mix, and this is something that Aristotle already recognized 2,500 years ago. Economists, Joel, you're the economist, right? Yeah, that's right. So, yeah, that's right. So we call it a mixed economy. So in Canada, we have crown corporations, but crown corporations are not the whole of our economy. We have private enterprise, we have small businesses, we have family-run businesses, we have large corporations. We do have crown corporations. We have government departments and so forth. We have national, provincial, and municipal parks that are operated by our various levels of government on behalf of the citizens as a whole. So we have diverse economies, diverse polities in that sense. The socialism wants to try to eliminate all that complexity and to try to compress all of that into a single communal form.
Economics, there's this term called tragedy of the commons.
Exactly.
And things like, even just let's use a park, which is a relatively sort of simple, commonly owned, property. The tragedy of the commons is that people consume the product more than they actually put back into it, and so you deteriorate the product over time. And so I think this is sort of you get, as you see that scaling out, to your point, like the bigger the community that they try to put this across, that problem becomes compounded because there's nobody to custodian the asset. And I think, giving a little bit of pushback, I would say the scenarios you described with like a corporation or different scenarios, those are to some extent voluntary, and the ability to leave and be compensated exists.
Yes, that's right.
And so those scenarios, I think the tragedy of the commons is more so not occurring, but maybe there's a bad manager that you've hired, and that's a different problem.
Right. Yeah, so what that means is that for common property that's genuinely common to large numbers of citizens, such as parklands and so forth, or pasture lands, if you're talking about a small village, that some person or some group needs to be given responsibility over the commons. So you can't just have a kind of anarchic, everybody's going to be responsible, we'll all put it. You have to have schedules. If you go to university and you're living with a whole series of other students, and you have a common living space, you'll probably put a schedule as to who's going to clean the kitchen, who's going to clean the bathrooms, things like that. You have to have an actual person or a group of people that are going to take responsibility for that. And the larger such a thing becomes, the more that particular group will have to exercise a certain amount of coercion in order to keep people, fulfilling their duties, their responsibilities on a regular basis. And of course, in the Soviet Union, people did not necessarily work very hard for these communal farms or state farms or these state corporations, state factories, and so forth. And they said, well, there were jokes, these kind of gallows humor that Russians would come up with, and they said, well, they pretend to pay us and we pretend to work. Is the way they put it. Yeah. So it's not being paid in hard currency at that time because the ruble was not exchangeable on the open market, so they say, well, they pretend to pay us, we pretend to work. And that's typically what's going to happen in that kind of a society.
Please subscribe and hit the bell to stay up to date. If you liked or disliked the snippet, give it a like and share your 2 cents with us in the comment section. And remember, 6 cents makes change.